friends, welcome back to the Cripple Chronicles podcast. If you are tuning in for the first time, I am Becca. I have one leg, I'm a wheelchair user. I identify myself as a cripple. If this is the first time you're watching this, you have tuned into the wrong episode because you're going to have to go back to the first part and watch that. This episode is a continuation from the last episode. You will notice that I am actually posting this a week after instead of a fortnight after. That is not because the schedule is changing with fortnightly uploads for now. However, because I split this episode into two parts, I did still record it on the same day because I was on a roll. But yes, if you dislike the fact that this has been split into two parts, like I said, complain about it in the comments, send me an email. Next time I'll make it a full episode. So let your voice be heard, let your opinions be known. If you don't like it, drop a comment on YouTube. Email me at cripplecchroniclespod@gmail.com. Send me a message on Instagram or TikTok at cripplecchroniclespod. And if you want to follow me on any of those places, please do that too. But I am going to get right back into talking about relationships. I split this kind of down into 9 different sections. So we are on the 4th part. This is talking about reflecting on past relationships. And I am going to start this. I have about 4 points, and then I start to talk about some sexual abuse and sexual trauma. If this is something that is triggering to you, I will kind of give you an idea of when I'm starting this. I will put a timestamp in the description and on the screen where you can go to if you want to skip this. But yes, I hope you enjoy this week's episode of the podcast. Sometimes where friendships or relationships have broken down or drifted apart, and kind of the feelings that come with that for me. But I also wanted to think about what things were like for me when I was unhealed and trying to still put my trauma away in a big box and trying to forget it. Because there were times in my life where the relationships that I had were transactional, and that is a really blunt way to put it, but at the core of it, that's what it was. I gave things to people by thinking about my every action and molding it to what other people would want, and in return I receive support, care, affection, sometimes love. But especially in romantic relationships, when it came to love, that was where I got scared because I wasn't really being fully myself. I was just trying to be what they wanted me to be. Therefore, I didn't think I was worthy of this love. They didn't actually love me as a person, they just loved the idea of me. And this is what I'm talking about. In the previous episode, I spoke about embellishing things, lying slightly about things, creating this idea that you are a much more put together version of yourself than you actually were. But I really didn't think that I was worthy of love and support that I received from people who they wanted romantic relationships with me, and I really wanted to be loved, but I just didn't know how to go about it. I was extremely anxious in my relationships, and I definitely still am. I have a lot of anxiety around my relationships that I am kind of working through in trauma, and I'm obviously wanting to talk about working about in trauma, working. My God, what was I saying? There's things that I am working through in therapy about my trauma and stuff that I want to go on and speak about at a later date when I've kind of finished the therapy, because I think kind of doing episodes alongside it isn't really going to be very helpful for me, to be honest. This is where there is going to be a trigger warning for mentions of sexual abuse and trauma, and I am probably going to recommend that you skip to the next part of this, which is going to be the timestamp, which is about fear of abandonment. There were periods in relationships that I've had where sex didn't really feel like it was my choice. For example, there being a withdrawal of affection or a change to a negative attitude, knowing that there's going to be some kind of argument if I don't have sex or do some kind of sexual act. And those experiences were very early on in my relationships, and they really shaped how I saw sex. During probably one of the times where I would acknowledge that I have been most toxic in my life, I knew that I could use sex to get company. I didn't want to be alone, but there were then times where I gave my body to someone and then they just upped and left. They left 15, 20 minutes after. I actually had an occasion where somebody said to me, like, oh, I'm just going to go pick up a takeaway for us, and just left, and I never fucking saw him again. Like, that really plays on you, where you, like, it was fueled by myself, by thinking that I could use sex from a man to get affection and company, and maybe they would stay the night with me and I wouldn't have to be alone. But that then ended up causing me a massive amount of pain and hurt, and it developed this. Oh, I feel like I'm gonna start getting emotional, because this is obviously quite difficult, but there are times where I just saw myself as an object in terms of sex. Like, it didn't really matter if I wanted to do it or not, because the attitude's going to change if I don't, and it's better if I just do it. And it's only kind of been in the past few months where I've actually been able to be self-aware about these things and acknowledge it, but it's not always where. Sometimes when I get that feeling, when I feel like I have to please somebody else, even if I am not fully in the mood anymore because I've started shit, so I need to finish it. And that's a fucking, that is a absolutely fucking horrible, like, mental attitude that is basically drilled into women, that, like, your body is for sex. Your body is to carry a child. I don't fucking want a child. Like, I can be a person who can say that I enjoy having sex, but that doesn't mean that I have to give it out to people if they want it from me. And I just feel like that's an idea in society where you're told, like, you're meant to have a child. Like, your body is designed for you to have a child. Even if I went to, like, if I wanted to get my female anatomy taken out, the times now where you go to the hospital, they literally say, have you got a partner? Because what if they want children? I don't fucking care. If I have a partner and they want children, then they can go fucking find somebody else to have children with. Like, I I don't want kids. It shouldn't have to be a man's decision what happens to my fucking body. And I'm obviously getting a bit sidetracked from relationships. That was something where I hadn't really wrote that in my notes about feeling like an object, because it feels a bit too real. And even now there are times where those feelings from my early relationships come back up, because, like I was saying, that kind of attitude that women's bodies are for sex, like, it is just so fucking common as a woman to be objectified. For example, I had a stranger message me on social media talking about my eating habits and how I must be so thin and tiny, and then like responding to a photo being like, yeah, still tiny. Like, you've not asked me what my age is, what my hobbies are, anything about me, yet you're talking about my fucking body. Like, who even are you to think that that's fucking okay? Like, what the actual fuck? It's just so icky to me, because who the fuck are you to judge my body before you even know me as a person? Like, keep that shit to yourself. Keep those opinions to yourself, because it doesn't matter if I'm tiny or if I'm curvy or if I'm fat or if I'm obese. Like, I'm fucking me. Like, my body has got me through so much, and I don't care what your opinion is on my body, so take it elsewhere. In a time of being unhealed, I really felt like my body was the only way where I could actually get people to want me. There's a lot of times where I need to remind myself that that's not the case anymore. There are relationships in my life where I look back and I know that I didn't act in the best possible way that I could, and I know that I've hurt people whilst I was hurting, because even if it wasn't intentional, I used them. I feel like one of my values couldn't be accountability unless I was able to reflect on periods where I have been toxic in my life, where I did use sex to get people to be around me. I wasn't truly being myself, I was playing a different version of myself, and in that, I hurt people. People fell for me, people had genuine relationships for me, and that wasn't even really me. It was just a different version of me, a version for them to like, and that's kind of manipulating their feelings in that. And that was because I didn't know what I needed, I didn't know what I wanted, I didn't know who I was, I didn't like myself. I say that I know that my body was the only way for people to want me, but I didn't want my body. I couldn't look in the mirror without wanting to break down into tears. That for me is something that's really difficult. Like, it actually makes me feel a bit sick talking about it, because there are people that I've hurt that I've genuinely really cared about. Although I didn't want a romantic relationship, I did genuinely build connections with people where I cared about them, but I couldn't continue to have them in my life, because I would want them there in some kind of friendship capacity, and they couldn't fulfill this because they've fallen in love with a version of me that's not even me. And then that meant that I would just ghost people. I would just run away, cut it off, and I'm glad now that I am in a place where when those fears crop up, when I am feeling like I am self sabotaging, I'm being overly anxious about a relationship, I'm jumping to conclusions, I voice that. I tell people how I'm feeling. I tell people the processes that I'm going through so that they can understand that I'm not taking the relationships that I have in my life lightly. Like, I want to do everything I can to make them better. However, if people kind of disrespect that, I'm not just going to sit there and let that happen. This then moves on to the next point, which is fear of abandonment. You are safe from any kind of sexual chat. So if you're tuning back in now, thanks. I am glad that I kind of gave you a bit of warning, but I am able to acknowledge that the feelings and fears that arise in my relationships are because I have a fear of being abandoned, of people leaving me. So I try to protect myself. I try to cut out, well, in the past, when I was an unhealed version of myself, I would feel that things were getting too real and I would cut that relationship off, because I wanted to make sure that there was a clean break before there was any way for the person to hurt me. That's kind of fear of abandonment in kind of relationships. Where does this come into play in the healing journey? I think I have really struggled to set boundaries with people who are close to me. I would feel like if I was setting a boundary that I was being difficult or unreasonable. The first time I had to really kind of confront this continuously when I was in a relationship with an active addict. Alcohol is a really, really big trigger for me, and I had to set boundaries to feel safe. But these boundaries were crossed quite a few times. And I think it is the first time where I've actually been able to say to somebody that, like, I love you, but I love myself more, and I can't continue to be mistreated. In fairness, I vocalised that and then I still let things slide for at least 6 months. But I have said to friends that when it comes to things like this, I do feel like I would be described as being naive because I believe what people are telling me. But then, like I have mentioned in the first part of this, when actions don't come, there begins to be more and more sadness and confused feelings than happiness. With this relationship, we had been on and off a few times initially, and I had been upfront that when we'd first kind of got together, I wasn't looking for a boyfriend, I wasn't looking for a relationship. Uni was my main focus. I had to get through uni, I had to qualify, I had to get my registration as a nurse. That was my focus. That, myself, and a relationship. I didn't have time for a full relationship at that point, and I tried to be very upfront about it. There were times where this partner kind of brought up, like, oh, we're dating, and I'm like, we're not. We're friends with benefits. This is what's happening here. I'm seeing other people. I don't mind if you're seeing other people. And I think the first time we stopped talking was because I was feeling like he was expecting a lot more time from me than what I was willing to give with the things that I had set out. He had higher expectations of what I was willing to fulfill. But in this, he also kind of owed me money, and it was a lack of respect in that he had owed me money for months. He had a job where he was getting paid, and I'd kind of said, like, look, pay me the money on this date, and if you don't, I'll be coming to your door. And he didn't do it. And I think at that point, he probably thought that I wasn't going to follow through with what I actually said. So I turned up to his door and he was like, well, why are you here so early? And I'm like, well, I wanted to make sure you were in. Like, I'm not going to give you warning that I'm coming to your door for you to fuck off and not pay me money. Like, this is embarrassing. So that's where there was kind of a lack of respect in that way, because also when I went to get the money, he took the money out of the bank and then said, how fast can you run? And I'm like, I'm not going to fucking chase you. If you run away with that money, like, I'll just come back. Like, I'll just go back to your door. I'll ask your mum for the money. Like, I'll come back and I'll bring my brother with me and he'll get the money off of you because he can fucking run a lot faster than I can. At this point, this was pre accident. Like, I still had both of my legs. I was a healthy adult. Like, though that would have been a fucking mental comment to make if I was in my wheelchair. Like, how fast can you run? Can you imagine? Oh my god. Just had to clarify that there. But I still then ended up drifting back, and it was a few months later, and then the accident happened, and I do feel like we trauma bonded while in the hospital, and I started to get scared because going home, it felt like things were getting real and we were going to be in a relationship, and I was feeling like he was getting kind of bored of me or unsure, and I just didn't really know where I stood. And that was, like I said before, when I feel unsure in relationships, I feel like the rug's going to get pulled from under me. So he came to see me after I got out of hospital, and then he left my house a mess, which I asked him not to. I communicated that I was in too much pain to clean up after him like I would have before I had the accident, and he still left it a mess. And then when I brought it up to him, he said, oh, well, I'll come back and clean it. Like, I've already done it. It took me 45 minutes when it would have taken you 5. Like, the level of disrespect is unreal. It was one of those people that I just couldn't help myself but go back to him. And Then the point where I said, like, I love you, but I love myself more, this was after 4 years of us knowing each other. It was 3 years of knowing each other. It was a point where, no, 4 years, 3 years, I don't know. It was quite a while of knowing each other. I have a lot of times in my life where I've been left feeling abandoned or extremely let down, and it's something where I have a lot of guards up because of it. When it comes to going out places, I need clear communication that plans are going ahead and what's happening, because there's been too many times where I've got myself all hyped up and I've got ready and I've been ready to leave and going for the time that we've agreed, and then somebody says, "Oh, look, I can't make it." And that drop in my emotions is really hard for me to regulate, because I've been up on a high of excited to do these plans, and then you've fucking cancelled right at the last minute, showing that you don't really have respect for my time and my energy that I've put into getting ready and prepared for doing these plans, because you could have let me know at any other period before then, especially people who have a large part in my life and understand the way that I work and how much planning I take for things and how I'm always early to places and stuff like that, because there's been times as well where I've went and I've got into town and somebody's not been there and then not showing up, and I've then just had to go home, and that is such a shit feeling. So I really try to be proactive that these abandonment issues that I have aren't triggered. I try to be protective of myself, and it is not always possible to avoid triggers. They're everywhere in life. For example, earlier, me talking about kind of sexual experiences, me giving a heads up at the end of the last episode before I was starting to talk about it, and then after I was talking about it, because those are things where I could talk about it in my experience and be selfish in that and have no other awareness for how those things that I'm speaking about impact people. But also, on the other hand, I don't give trigger warnings for a lot of medical stuff that I talk about, and there's a lot of things in that that can be triggering for people. But that is a whole kind of world of things where there's things that I could talk about my recovery where it wouldn't be triggering to somebody, but it would be triggering to somebody else, because everybody is unique. Everybody has different experiences, and I want to try and cater to people as much as possible so they feel comfortable and kind of included in things. So part of that is recognizing other people's needs, but what about recognizing your own personal needs? This kind of follows on from what I was saying previously, and like, I am catering to other people's needs, but how do I actually recognize what my own needs are? What are the things that I've put to the side for myself in relationships to make other people feel more comfortable, or because I was helping them? How often has there been a time where you've not quite wanted to do something, but you've just went with a group consensus anyway because it feels a bit like peer pressure, and you still want to hang out with your pals, and even if you're not 100% comfortable, you'll still do it anyway. And there's still those feelings of discomfort where it's good to say, like, even if you go out and you have a great time, it's good to say after it, like, I really did enjoy, like, going out tonight, but I felt a bit uncomfortable when we were saying because of X, Y, and Z. Oh, I need to reposition myself. Getting uncomfy again because I've been sitting here for too long recording. It's really it's really hard to say in those situations, like, sorry, I don't really feel like that. Even recently, I have been invited to go to one of my friends' wedding receptions and their hen do, and I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited to meet their other pals and celebrate with them. However, I am very triggered around alcohol, like I previously mentioned. And for me, I need to think when I'm going out in those scenarios, what things are going to be in the environment where it's triggering to me. So I'd said, look, I'm going to come for the first part. I'm probably going to be from this time to this time, or until you move on to somewhere else. And it's just to let you know, if I leave before this time, it's nothing to do with me not enjoying the night. It's just because I'm struggling with the environment that I'm in. And being able to message my friends and say that and feel accepted in it and know that they are kind of looking for inclusive places, because one of my pals is autistic and disabled as well. So catering for them and us, like, well, catering for us, not even just catering for them, catering for us, catering for disabled people, getting in contact with places to find out if they're accessible, and maybe thinking about somewhere that's going to be quieter and things like that. It's things in relationships like that that make me feel really supported and loved and accepted, and able to voice those concerns and say, look, these are the things that I'm triggered by, and I just want to let you know that it's not a you problem, it's something that I struggle with. And then having a response where it's like, okay, well, I was actually thinking that this place is going to be quite busy, so we're going to maybe try here. Like, it's really nice to have relationships like that where I can say, like, these are the needs that I have in this situation, and somebody says, okay, that's perfectly fine. Like, it's so refreshing, because there's been too many times in my life where I felt like I'm asking for too much. My accident was really a catalyst for a lot of things, but the main thing was realizing that I couldn't have my mum around to support me in a dire time I need, because my soul couldn't handle the inevitable letdown that was going to come with the cycle that she repeats in her life. And I've had conversations with my dad where we have chatted about our relationship, and I've set boundaries, which a few of them he then come back and said, have I done this? And I've had to explain that it's not a case that I'm setting these boundaries because you've done this thing that's upset me. It's more that I'm telling you within fair warning so that you don't do that thing and then wonder why I'm upset about it. I would much rather tell you before you do something than having to have a conversation after the fact and saying, oh, look, I actually don't enjoy when you do that. Can you think next time maybe not about doing that? Because I just feel like it's better to try and be clear about those kind of expectations and boundaries in the initial instance when you're kind of having these conversations. For me, setting boundaries includes spending days where I sit and look over a list of things that I've wrote down, and making sure that I'm not being controlling or manipulative or trying to alter like somebody else's like personality in some kind of way, just kind of behavior and actions that impact me, and how to protect myself, and how to word these where I'm not being defensive or confrontational, but coming with understanding that there might be reasons why you do these things. But for me, it's so an example of this, I'm kind of trying to explain it, but I feel like I'm getting a bit bogged down by trying not to go into specifics. So when I kind of had this conversation with my dad and I set boundaries, we were meant to be going out for dinner. And I had said to him, like, kind of, if you don't acknowledge this or kind of see my boundaries, I'm not going to be coming for dinner, because there had been a period of kind of resistance, and the relationship had some difficulties. And for me, going to that dinner would have been me in an uncomfortable situation, having to go back to coping mechanisms that I would have had in the past, and burying how I actually feel about something to keep the peace and to make sure that everybody else has a nice time. And for me, it was just better in that scenario to say that I'm actually just going to remove myself from the situation. You can still go out for dinner with my brother and have a really nice time. But for me, if we don't discuss this, it's going to be far too hard to sit round a dinner table and not have it acknowledged. So it was good to be able to properly have a conversation before we had that dinner, so that I could still go and we could still spend that time together before he was like back out of the country and things like that. It's one of those things as well where I don't set boundaries to manipulate people. It's not kind of an ultimatum. Like sometimes I will voice to people like I'm feeling like I need to take a bit of a step back. And that's not because I'm being threatening to kind of try and change their behavior. It's just that I'm voicing that all of the things going on right now are kind of turbulent for me to deal with and I'm really struggling with it. My emotions are getting too hurt, so I kind of need to take a step back in it. It's okay to have needs in a relationship. It is actually essential. If you're going into a romantic relationship, friendship, co-workers, even kind of professional relationships between like a patient or a client, or like whatever you do for work, there are needs in that relationship. You have needs that need to be met, the other person have needs that needs to be met, and all of these different branches will have different needs, different categories, different things. Like even in your friendships, you'll have people that you're closer to, people that you're more distant with, and those relationships will have different needs and different kind of qualities and things that you get from each other and gain from each other, and when that support is given and when that support's needed. And it's all about finding the right balance. I've kind of looked a bit into relationship anarchy and looking at having all of your relationships on one baseline. There is no priority relationships, and I do like how they kind of split relationship anarchy down because it's in different kind of sections and you can see the different areas where relationships fall into. However, I definitely still have priorities in my relationships with people that I'm closer to and people that I'm more distant to. It's not so much the type of the relationship, but the closeness in my life. How much are we in each other's like inner circles where providing or receiving support in that kind of way. These are things that it changes, it evolves over time. Close friends become more distant, distant friends become closer. People maybe fade in and out of your life. There's friends that are going through more turbulent times, need more support. I know that in my friendships, I can lead a very supportive role, but sometimes it requires more support from me than I have to give. And in those moments, there really has to be a give and take of someone offering support, but also receiving that support, and me being able to use my words and say, I really know that you're struggling at the moment. However, I have these things going on and I have capacity with this, but I don't have capacity to help with that. That's really important. Like recognizing those needs, being able to say that I really care and love you and I want to support you. However, right now, these are all of the items that are on my plate and I have time to help you out with this thing, but can you maybe get somebody else to help you out with this? And it's better to be upfront about these things and give enough kind of time and notice instead of getting yourself into loops of anxiety of thinking, okay, well, I can't do this and I'm going to let this person down. So I really need to try and get this done. And I'll try to stop doing this one thing so I can focus on this. And in this whole time where you've been in this anxiety, you're never going to get the task done. And you could have just said to your friend instead, but you've chose to kind of stay in that anxiousness instead of using words, if you kind of get what I mean in that. These things require open communication. When has there been a time that, thinking in the terms of like relationships with co-workers, your co-worker has been slacking and then you've ended up being dumped with a shit ton of work on top of what you already have to do and you're raging about it. But if you stay raging about it and hold that kind of grudge, that's going to mean that there's then tension and strain in that relationship for work. You're maybe not going to want to do things to help them out because they've not been pulling their weight, and that just doesn't work out. It means that you need to have open communication. That doesn't mean that every time you start seeing someone, have a new friendship, start a new job, have a new employee, that you need to go, right, okay, here's all of my lists of my needs that you have to meet, because you can't do that for everyone. Like I've been saying throughout both of these parts, everybody is unique. People have different needs, different things, different backgrounds that they're coming with, where they need support with things, they need things to be handled a bit more gentle. Everybody comes with a different story. Everybody has different triggers, different things that have happened in their lives, different levels of privilege. Sometimes people will just disregard what you have experienced because they can't compute in their head that that kind of thing could have ever happened, because they have had a privilege to have better upbringing, family life. And even then, sometimes when you see somebody who has a perfect family, a perfect upbringing, the more you get to know them, it's not really perfect. There is cracks in every family, cracks in every relationship. Everybody has things that they have had to deal with in their lives up until this point, and they're bringing that along into a relationship that you're going into. So you need to have conversations about those things and be able to be open about them and say, okay, how are we going to work with this? How can I help with that? Is there support that I can give you? My best friend Eleanor has dissociative identity disorder. When I found out she had DID, we had conversations where I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand a bit more what it's like for her to actually live with DID, what it's like when there's other alters, what I can do if I'm speaking to her and I think it's another alter presenting, how I can help out in those moments. And it's those conversations that really strengthen our friendship. It strengthens the way we're able to support each other. When I was struggling in December, her being able to say to me, it's the first time that I've actually realised how kind of let down you've been in your life and how much that's impacted you. And like the grief that I saw you going through was really difficult to watch. Like I just wanted to be there and support you. And it's knowing that in our relationship, she stays hundreds of miles away from me. There's times where we're both struggling and I just want to go chill and spend some time with her. But it's not sustainable to do that. It would make us feel good to spend time in each other's company, but we can't do that anytime one of us feels down. So we stick to FaceTime or doing things like that. Helping others to be compassionate. This is something that I kind of covered earlier. It is in the first part when I was talking about difficulties that can arise in relationships. The idea of staying stagnant in your own recovery journey to kind of help other people. This episode has really came about from just thinking about relationships over the past year or two, but also since starting therapy, a chunk of work that I am doing is going to be around my anxiety in relationships. But like I've kind of mentioned, I'm planning on doing some episodes talking about things that I've learned from therapy, but it's going to be after doing therapy so that I can kind of have a whole holistic overlook view of it. Because if I just do it bits at a time, it just doesn't quite feel right. The reason why I bring therapy up is because I was explaining to my psychologist that I am a recovering people pleaser. I think it is a phrase that I used in the first appointment, and she still just keeps bringing it up to me. And I get it because it is a good way to put it. And that means that I know that there are things that I can do that's going to help someone else along in their journey if I stick around. However, the other side of that is that I'm stuck stagnant, or I'm, how do I kind of explain it? It's almost like I'm on the path that I'm on and there's mud at the side of it. And when I'm spending too much time giving support to somebody else, I'm trudging through that mud at the side of the road, which means I'm 10 times less the speed than if I was just on the normal path. And it's hard to find a balance where you're still in their orbit, the door's still open, or does that mean walking away wishing them the best and actually meaning it when you say it, and closing the door and saying that's a relationship that I leave in the past because I want to see you grow, but I also need to move forward too. And that's never an easy decision to make, whatever decision it is. If it means staying or walking away, it's a difficult choice to make. Usually, if I am in a situation where I'm helping someone but I'm feeling hurt along the way, I'll usually outline things that I kind of need to see an improvement in, because if there's not an improvement, then the hurt that's being caused is too much to carry on. If that hurt keeps being caused, you're going to end up chipping me away until I'm nothing. I can't have worked so hard to build myself to let somebody else do that. I don't want the cycle to repeat itself. I don't want to stay in relationships where I have noticed patterns where the same thing keeps happening. And when you bring it up, how many times do you bring it up before somebody isn't actually going to take on board of what you've said to them? How many times do you need to voice that actions have hurt you before it just feels like blatant disrespect for your feelings? Because I'm a very compassionate person. I do try to see the best in people, but what that also means is that I'll sometimes excuse inexcusable behaviour because things that have been going on in their life, when I give them a chance to explain why things happened the way that they did, I'm not going to say it's excuses, because explaining why you have acted in a way that you have acted and being able to acknowledge that there are reasons behind it is a very big thing to do. It's hard when people can acknowledge that these things are happening, but then they continue to carry it on, or they ask for advice and they don't take the advice, and then they come back and say, "Oh, Becca, you were so right about that," and then we talk about something else and it's the same thing again. And it gets pretty, like, it is going to be wild for me to say as somebody, but it gets pretty tiring of hearing that you're right when somebody is actively choosing to do the opposite things from what you're telling them to kind of do to improve. And it's not that kind of way where I'm saying that and thinking that I am on a higher level. Like, I want to think of my friendships and my relationships as my life as being equal in it. And if somebody is asking me for advice and then they don't take it, my advice isn't going to change. When it gets to the point 5, 10 times of saying, "Do you know, you were right about that, I maybe should have taken your advice," like, what point do you say I'm wasting my time and energy here trying to help because I'm saying the same things over and over? And when is the time where you say enough is enough? I like to lead my life by example. I like to treat others how I would like to be treated. One of my biggest icks is when someone doesn't have respect for my time, or they think that their time is more important than anyone else's. And usually this crops up in kind of what I'd said about waiting until the last minute to cancel something, knowing that I'll have spent hours getting ready and hyping myself up to this because that's just how I do things. Like, in a situation where it's somebody that doesn't really know you, like, fair enough, first time it happens, all right. But if you've seen the kind of fallout and upset that happens when you do that and then you continue to do it, like, it is so difficult to be compassionate and have understanding for what you're going through, because I'm then just collateral damage in that. When I'm collateral damage, again, it's that kind of things of, if you keep chipping away at me, there's not going to be anything left. And I don't want that in my relationships. I want relationships where we can build each other up, not tear each other down. And when I'd kind of said about advice, if people ask for advice or I'm kind of giving advice, I would say, well, this is how I would tackle that situation. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you have to do to tackle it. And here's kind of things that have helped in a scenario where I've had similar feelings, because I don't ever want to tell people how to live their life and what they need to do. But if they're asking me for advice, I'm going to tell them honestly the answer, what they're asking me. And if somebody's kind of talking about something and I'm noticing like negative self talk or kind of belief patterns are a bit off, like I'll kind of say, like, can I chip in? Can I give you my advice? Can I tell you what I'm thinking here? Because sometimes people don't want your advice. Sometimes people just need a vent and a rant, and that's okay too. Like, don't always need to be there telling somebody what to do. Sometimes you just need to be a listening ear, and that's okay too. But you need to know kind of where you stand in that. So if you ask, like, oh, can I chip in here? And somebody says yes and then gets kind of annoyed about it, it's very hard where to say, like, where's the progression here? Where's the point where we kind of meet in the middle? Because I've asked for something and you've not liked what I've said, but like I kind of asked for permission. So I don't know. I just feel like there are points where there are people in our lives where the relationship's really important. Like, you care about them a lot, you have a lot of love for them, but the behaviours that they are displaying are very selfish and inconsiderate of your feelings. And I mentioned before about being a bit too compassionate, and people get a bit more grace with me than I would usually allow, because when I react in a situation, I will tend to apologise if I thought the reaction was out of pocket or not how I would initially like to react. If I've kind of been talking about something for a long while and I'm not feeling like I'm being heard, I will end up raising my voice, but I'm not somebody who likes to raise my voice. So even in the moments, I will be somebody who is very apologetic for doing that, because I take myself by surprise, because it's one of those kind of more unconscious triggers where I don't feel heard and I raise my voice, because sometimes to be heard, you need to just be the loudest voice in the room. And that's not what I'm used to. So I take myself by surprise. And then sometimes I feel like I'm maybe not given the same amount of grace. People don't kind of think about it in the same way when they react negatively. And there is a lot of empathy and understanding in situations where things crop up, where it is maybe triggered by past relationships, family dynamics, past traumas. But when these things become a cycle and I start noticing patterns, at what point do I then say I can no longer be compassionate towards someone else about their situation, because it takes away from the compassion that I need to give myself in the situation. I need to give myself more compassion to stop those negative self talk loops. However, if I'm pouring more out to somebody else and taking on their side of it, I'm then being too harsh on myself. And it's finding a balance in that, because I would hate to walk away from somebody in their time of need because it was the first time that it had happened. I have tried to work really hard on my communication skills and speaking up when I feel hurt or when I feel like my needs are unmet. And this is really hard in a situation where you can understand how the events unfolded, what is going on in the other person's life, and giving a bit of leeway for that, but also acknowledging that my feelings still matter, because there was times in relationships where although somebody has hurt me, they've then explained how they've been feeling for hours on end, and it's left me then feeling really unheard, because this was a place where I was upset and I was trying to voice it, and I've not actually been able to talk about it because you've gave me all of the reasons for why it happened, instead of actually understanding the feelings that are underlying. It's something where I need to be very proactive in noticing patterns, identifying cycles, and saying, like, this is a cycle that I am noticing that is repeating here. And we've had conversations about how to stop this cycle, yet it's still continuing. Therefore, I need to remove myself from it, because when you love and care about someone, it is really fucking difficult to choose myself over them. It is really fucking difficult to say, okay, I need to stop hurting here. It's tough. It's really challenging to voice hurt, and when it then upsets the other person, which I totally get. Like, when you are told by somebody that you care about and you love that you've hurt them, it also hurts you. Like, it is shit to know that there is somebody who you want to give feelings of happiness and joy and contentment, and you've hurt them where they're really upset. It is hard to see that. I've had periods with the person that I was seeing kind of recently. There was times in that relationship where I voiced that I was hurt and he got upset with it, and it put me in a position where I ended up just using my words and kind of saying, like, I can see that you're getting upset and I really want to comfort you and I want to tell you that it's okay, but in this moment I can't tell you that it's okay because then that invalidates my feelings. That's so difficult, but hurt is just a part of life. I am definitely someone who will give someone more chances than they deserve. I've mentioned that in this episode, or the first part of this. I give people a bit more leeway than they deserve. I'm naive to taking on people's words and wanting to see the actions from it. There becomes a point where if you're telling someone over and over again that the same action has hurt you, for me, 3 times is kind of the rule. It's a bit like 3 strikes and you're out. But even then, I'm somebody who will look at something and say, well, they did that one thing and altered that action, so really this is only strike one, not strike two. And that's just giving people a chance. But how many times does somebody say, look, thanks for giving me another chance, before it's one chance too many? And to me, once is a mistake, twice is you're needing a reminder, and third is out the door. Like, if you do it 3 times, then that's it for me. There's some times where it could technically be 5 times because I've not exactly been steadfast on what the goalpost is, so I move it for myself. Because when you have relationships where you feel a genuine connection and love and care and support and all of those happiness, joy, good emotions, but there's also feelings of sadness that comes with it, you don't want to leave those good times. Or I know that I don't anyway, as somebody who has had a lot of sadness and despair in my life. I want to hang on to the joy and the good, but there's also a way of looking at it in relationships where you look at it and say, is this joy and happiness just an effect of the sadness that has been caused before this cycle repeats and you're sad again, joy and happiness, sadness, and it becomes a part of what is worth it. When is it worth it? Is the sadness that you feel worth the happy times? You'll be happy to know that I'm nearly finished, and you'll be glad that I split this into 2 parts because I'm at an hour of recording. We're at point 8, which is making sure there's a balance. Like I mentioned earlier, there needs to be a balance. I've just shared the kind of internal battle that I can certainly have when it comes down to setting boundaries, keeping boundaries, having timescales for myself, where I look at relationships and then assess if this is something that I am going to carry on, and are the happy times worth the hard times? And when I have addressed the hard times, how have those conversations gone? Because sometimes when you start to prioritize your own needs, people don't really like that. When you start to speak up for the fact that your own needs haven't been met, people don't like that. People get defensive over it. People will say, yeah, but I've done that. I've been trying to do that. It sucks to be told that what you've been doing might not feel like it's good enough. And if that is all that you can give and the other person still isn't happy, then that is where you draw a line in that relationship, because you're just in 2 different places. The needs have expanded out with what you can provide. I suppose it's easy to say that, and it's not easy when you're actually going through it, and there's the whole feelings of losing that relationship and grieving it, and should I maybe just stay quiet and put it to the side, and then we can carry on the relationship, but that just causes resentment later down the line. There are times where people have had an issue and it's ending up being something that actually started 6 months previously, and they've just added loads of things on top of it, but the root of the problem is something that I didn't even know that I'd done wrong. And it's really hard to navigate those situations because if someone's been sitting on information for that long, there's too much resentment, there's too much damage that's already been done to the relationship. And that's where you also need to kind of find a balance where you take time to process something, but then you have the hard conversation as soon as possible. And I say as soon as possible because in relationships, romantic, friendships, family, you need to think about kind of going back to what I was talking about seasons of life, acknowledging where you are at a season in your life, where somebody else is, what kind of things are they experiencing at the moment? Is it the correct time for you to have a conversation about this? When I'd said like about prioritizing your needs, and sometimes when people like when you start to prioritize your needs, people don't really like that. The reason why I mentioned that is I'm actually going to kind of go on to speak a little bit about narcissistic traits, not narcissism. I'm not going to throw about narcissist because that is a personality disorder that I'm not trained to diagnose. I'm not trained to diagnose somebody with a narcissistic personality disorder. However, I can look at narcissistic traits, and when a lot of them show up in a person, I can decide to distance myself because I've been around people in my life who have shown a fair amount of narcissistic traits, and I've got used to kind of identifying them when they are very blatant, but sometimes it takes me a bit longer. And I'm going to kind of break down what these narcissistic traits are. There's about 15, so I'm just going to run through them. Number one is a lack of empathy. Number two, being grandiose, which means having like an inflated sense of self importance, like exaggerating achievements and talents. Manipulation, using charm, guilt to manipulate people, having a sense of entitlement, believing that you deserve special treatment, having a need for constant admiration for the things that they do for you, exploitation, taking advantage of other people so that they can kind of achieve their goals. I've realised I've stopped fucking numbering them. We're on number 7 now, which is an inability to accept criticism, which I've kind of mentioned, where when you kind of bring up something where somebody has upset you and they're not able to take that criticism on board as being constructive, like you're not doing it to belittle them or tear them down, you're just wanting your relationship to be better, but that can end up kind of resulting in times of turmoil, having shallow relationships or an ability to form strong, lasting bonds with people, violating boundaries is number 10, feeling threatened, having like feelings of jealousy and envy is number 11. 12, fantasies of unlimited success, power, or beauty, having kind of unrealistic beliefs about their own kind of potential and superiority. That kind of also ties into being like very grandiose, feeling like they're superior to everyone. 13, 13, an inability to recognise others' perspectives, difficulty in understanding or acknowledging viewpoints of others, emotional unavailability, being distant or unavailable, especially during times of need. And that is actually kind of a narcissistic trait, which is really abusive, which is kind of withdrawing affection or attention during times of need because you maybe feel like you haven't been validated enough. That's number 15, which is kind of a constant need for validation. And showing one of these or even a few doesn't mean that someone is a narcissist. Like I said, it's a personality disorder that I'm not qualified to diagnose people with. One of those traits is boundary violations, and my ex who had a problem with alcohol was where I really found my voice in setting boundaries, because he would cross them even if he had an explanation or an understanding of how these behaviors really impact and hurt me. He didn't think it was fair because he didn't feel that way, but it wasn't about him, it was about me and my feelings and having to protect myself in that. I'm using that as an example of boundary violation and how it can be selfish in terms of relationships. Not saying that that one example brands him as a narcissist, because I also recognize that alcoholism can be a very selfish illness, and I'm not sure if it's kind of bad to word it like that. However, addicts have those kind of blinkers on that I was talking about earlier, about the impact of their drinking on others, because it is about, well, not even drinking, it's about getting their next fix, getting their next hit, getting that next boost of good, happy emotions to take them away from the pain that they're feeling. And that's why there is a balanced need for looking after ourselves. That's why boundaries are important, because you can't change how someone else behaves, but you can change how that behavior impacts you. You can change if that behavior is in your inner circle, outer circle, or if it's completely cut off for your life. That was something that I kind of had to try and learn whilst dating somebody with an active addiction, was going to Al-Anon meetings and learning about kind of detachment with love, kind of saying like, I still love you, but I can't give you support in these things. I can't give you money where you are funding your addiction, and trying to be supportive, but also not be an enabler. When I was explaining that, I'd kind of explained like letting it impact you at close range, or being distant, or cutting off completely, because even if you cut somebody off or it's not as at close range, there is still an amount of harm or impact that is caused there. And there is definitely people, although I have said that I don't want to be keeping tabs on people's lives who are no longer in my life anymore, there is definitely people that I have a look on their social media just to see if they're still alive, because that's the baseline. I just want to know that they're still making it through, because that's the important thing. I'm going to finish today's episode on gratitude and loneliness. It is 111 on the recorder as I'm recording this. This episode is maybe going to be just over an hour long after I kind of cut out the pauses and things like this. I'm also not sure if, when recording this, how the kind of shadows are in the lighting, because I wanted to record this a lot earlier on in the day and it just got later and later. And I did expect to be finished recording this at 5:30, and it's now 5 to 7. So if you're watching on YouTube and you think like the lighting's a bit dodgy or the shadows are off, let me know. Leave me a comment, because it's something where I'm trying to kind of figure it out. If you're somebody that creates content and you have any suggestions for lighting that I can use that's kind of autistic friendly, neurodivergent friendly, light sensitivity friendly, that would be great, because I find when I've got lights on and doing a lot of recording, it does take a lot out of me. Gratitude and loneliness, although there are some days where I feel really fucking angry at the world that I have to heal from all of the things that I was brought up into an environment where I wasn't properly taught how to take care of myself, and I was taught to neglect my needs and be hyper vigilant to what others needed. But I am very grateful to have got to the point that I've got to. There has been so many times where I've stopped, get out the car, had a wee look around, had a wander around a nice big park before getting back onto the path. Just at the time where I've sat and dissociated or done careless things that haven't really helped me. I have all of the excuses to be an alcoholic or an addict. I have all of the reasons in my past history where if I went down that road, somebody would say to me, I can totally get it. She's had a really fucking hard life. Like, no wonder she's turned to substances to try and help her cope with things. However, I wake up every day and I choose not to do that because if I had a drink, it would be a bottle and I wouldn't stop. I take my medication the way I'm meant to take it because if I abuse my medication, that means that it could then get taken off of me and I can't live my life at a comfortable level because I've fucked that up for myself by abusing my medication or trying to escape from reality in my life, which isn't something that I want to do anymore. I am grateful that although I had to go through the accident and all the things that came after it, I really had to kind of tackle all of that head on, but I got through it and I learned a lot about myself whilst I was doing it. Everything was totally shattered, figuratively and literally, and I had to just piece it all back together somehow and make something for myself that looked beautiful. And I'm still working on that. Sometimes it does get lonely, not because I don't feel supported or feel love, but because I have times where I miss the people that I've had to leave behind. There are gaps in my life that have been left by those people, not because I built my life around them, but because there was little rituals I would do with people, little anniversaries, things we would have. It's hard to go out into the world and maybe do something that you really enjoy doing with somebody else and they're not here. That can bring feelings of loneliness and isolation, especially when there's been a lot of relationships in your life that haven't worked out. But it's for me accepting that not all relationships are meant to last forever because anything could happen. Like, life really is just a blessing. It's not a given. You could wake up tomorrow and somebody that is extremely important to you is no longer here, and you need to figure out how to kind of move on in your life without them. And that's not me even talking about death or anything morbid. That's just kind of saying that you could wake up and somebody's ghosted you. Somebody that you thought that there was something going really good with, friend, relationship, and you've been ghosted. And that's really hard, but I'm still trying to really just enjoy the time that I have, whether that's doing things on my own, finding new people to do things with, just going out to groups and getting involved in things that I enjoy and finding other people who enjoy them and creating kind of bonds and relationships during that. I think, oh, gosh, because I'm nearly an hour and 20 into recording, my butt is getting so numb and I'm so hungry. But the closing thoughts I have for today is that sometimes when you're healing, it can feel like it gets a bit lonely at the top. Sometimes there isn't a lot of people that are there with you, and you feel like the villain because you have to cut off relationships because they're not kind of moving you on in the place that you're at, and you can't kind of be dragged down with other people. And that's really fucking difficult to have to say that I'm really sorry, but we're just in totally different places. And it can be really heartbreaking and lonely and isolating, and it can be really sad sometimes. But I think it's just a part of the process, it's a part of the journey. It's getting used to that loneliness, acknowledging that it is a feeling that crops up, but it's not something that has to last forever. It's something that crops up, and I can still go to the people who I feel love and support from and say, yeah, I'm feeling a bit lonely today. I'm feeling a bit down because of X, Y, and Z. And that's just, it's a really important kind of aspect to have, I guess. If you're still listening to this, please subscribe to the podcast. Let me know anything that you've liked. The energy for the end of this podcast is very low because I'm getting so tired. I really need some food. But yeah, take care of yourselves, take care of your family. Or like, and by that I just mean whoever you call your family. Doesn't have to be blood. Like, love whoever you want to love and live a life that is making you happy. And on that note, I'm off, troops. I'm going to make myself some food. Catch you next week. Or in 2 weeks. Catch you in 2 weeks. Bye!